Andrew Thacker's son. Missing 8/17/53 a.m. Sequoia National Park, CA. Age at disappearance, 5 years. Sequoia National Park is a new cluster, located just south of Yosemite and in the same Sierra Nevada mountain range. It contains some of the highest mountains in the western United States. Evolution Valley is located inside the park and has a series of names associated with the evolution of life, a very beautiful and pristine region without significant hiking pressure. The park employs a series of outback rangers that live in remote regions of the park during the summer months and monitor these distant areas. On August 17, 1953, Mr. and Mrs. Thomas Thackerson from Norwalk, California, took their 3 boys, Talmadge, age 9, Roger, age 7, and Andrew, age 5, and their daughter, Muddy, age 2, on a 3-day camping trip to Sequoia National Park. One of the family's first stops was at one of the oldest living things in the world, the General Sherman giant sequoia, which is 2,000 years old. The family parked its vehicle and exited. They were admiring the giant trees when they noticed that as rapidly as they had exited the car, Andrew had vanished. The family quickly searched the parking lot and could not find the boy. Not long after Andrew went missing, authorities were notified. The parking lot where the Thackersons were parked sits just to the west of an extremely remote region of dozens of old lakes and miles of exposed granite. Sequoia National Park is very famous for being the location of one of the largest searches in the history of the National Park Service, the search for lost ranger Randy Morganson. Morganson was a long-time backcountry ranger that disappeared under highly unusual circumstances. The Park Service pulled out all resources to find him. Randy was eventually found in a very unusual location under extremely odd circumstances. Author Eric Blem wrote an amazing story about Randy, his life, and the NPS search the last season. Rather than recount the peculiarities of Randy's disappearance and how he was found, 1:11 advise you to pick up Eric's book. The circumstances of where Randy was found are just as unusual as any disappearance I have described in my 3 missing 411 books. The details we found in the Park Service reports related to Randy's disappearance are baffling. National Park officials pulled 100 men to scour the immediate area where Andrew Thackerson was lost. California Highway Patrol raced to the Thackerson home and retrieved cloth ing to bring to the scene so bluey hounds could have sent to track the boy. According to Lost Person Behavior by Robert Kester, a 5-year-old boy will be found 95% of the time in a distance of 5 miles or just from the point they were last seen. Ollie nost all. Children will walk downhill from the point they were jost, but, as you will see in many of these stories, this may not be as common as search manuals state. Almost 24 hours after Andrew disappeared, 3 teams of bloodhounds were scattered throughout the region, all supplied with Andrew's scent. Ranger Carl Kromberg was alone and 6 miles from the parking lot when he came across a horrible scene. Andrew was lying face down and motionless on a mountain trail far from all other searchers. Carl picked the boy up and did get some reaction. An August 19, 1953, article in the Long Beach Press-Telegram had the following statement about the discovery of Andrew. The boy was found about 6 miles from where he had disappeared. Rangers said that he apparently had walked some 12 to 18 miles through the woods. These are very rugged mountains, not hills and not meadows mountains. I don't think most adults could travel 12 to 18 miles in a 24-hour period, yet we are led to believe that a 5-year-old boy who has never been to this location can. I do not believe I could hike 18 miles in those mountains in 24 hours. Andrew the Thackerson was transported to the hospital and found to be in satisfactory condition. He was later released. I could not Find any articles or reports that had a statement from Andrew. Amy Jackson. Misrig 08/13/66 p.m. Deer Creek Campground, Sequoia National Park. Age at date appearance, 18 months. Amy Jackson and her parents traveled from their residence in Upland, California, to the Deer Creek Campgrounds in Sequoia National Park for a weekend of camping. The family arrived on Saturday, August 13th and quickly established camp. After the family had eaten and relaxed, they entered their tent and went to sleep. Sometime during the night, little Amy left her parents' tent without being heard and somehow walked into the darkness. Her parents didn't hear her leave the tent, and they had no explanation how she could have done this. The National Park Police were called, and they quickly sent out bloodhounds and aerial support to look for Amy. I'm sure that the searchers were thinking what I was when I researched this case. How far could an 18-month-old really walk in the mountains? At the end of the first day of searching, commanders were so disturbed by not finding any evidence of where the girl was located and the bloodhounds' inability to pick up a scent that the National Park Service didn't call their own special agents. They called the FBI for assistance. The FBI summoned additional helicopters, ground searchers, EquestI.N and volunteers, AO looking for the young girl. The search and rescue was occurring approximately 25 miles east of Portervigely at the 7,000-foot elevation. The Tulare County Sheriff had also asked the FBI for assistance as they couldn't find a trace of the girl, and the story the parents continued to tell seemed implausible at the time. 3 years later, almost the same scenario played out again in the same park. Imagine almost 400 searchers scouring the campsite and surrounding area and not finding any trace of an 18-month-old girl. Couple the lack of evidence with bloodhounds scouring the scene and failing to pick up a scent. Law enforcement was perplexed. On the fourth day of the search, a Kern County Special Rescue team made a disturbing discovery, as is explained in the August 18, 1966, article in the Arizona Republic. A crack Kern County Special Rescue team found the 18-month-old girl's body at the base of a large rock uphill from the Deer Creek campground. The same article also states the body of little Amy Jackson was found yesterday about 0.8 of a mile from where she disappeared 4 days earlier at a campground in the rugged Sierras north of here. Now you probably understand why the Kern County Sheriff had called the FBI. A little 18-month-old girl disappears at night. From a tent, searchers and bloodhounds find nothing, and the family states they never heard her leave. The search is probably covering everything downhill because that's where 90% of all children go when they are missing. I don't believe that anyone truly believed a girl as young as Amy would walk uphill that far in a rugged region, in the middle of the night at that elevation and with chilly temperatures. The implication of the find was that she might have died from a fall from a boulder, meaning she actually walked even farther, or she died of exposure. Many of the articles I reviewed stated that the sheriff believed the girl may have been kidnapped, thus the call to the FBI. Well, maybe she really was. Several articles stated that a 3-mile radius around TLE camp had been searched prior to the finding of the body, and nothing suspicious was found, a typical result on many of these cases. It would be useless to file a Freedom of Information Act request with the FBI regarding this case, since they never release any information on an open case. I believe this incident is highly suspicious, especially coupled with the other cases cited in this chapter. In my past Missing 411 books, I have repeatedly stated that I believe the FBI has a very large file cabinet with cases that feature unusual circumstances and unusual findings, as in this case. I have related many stories of where the FBI responds and states they are just monitoring the case. Many times they claim there is no evidence of abduction, yet local law enforcement believes a kidnapping has happened. FBI agents are masters at documentation and then sending those files for classification. Files regarding the Sewell disappearances of missing children do exist. Irene Hawk, missing 7/03/69-1 p.m., Dorst Creek Campground, Sequoia National Park. Age at disappearance, 9 years. Mr. and Mrs. Otto Hawk took 3 of their 4 children for a 4th of July camping holiday to the Dorst Creek Campground in Sequoia National Park. The elevation of the site was 6,700 feet, and it was a full campsite. The site sits approximately 80 miles north of Visalia and 60 miles east of Fresno. The Hawks pitched their tent and last saw their daughter, Irene, lying inside the tent at 8 p.m. Shortly after looking in on Irene, the Hawks could not find the girl. Dorst Creek was running adjacent to the camp, and the Hawks and searchers first centered their attention on the water. After pacing the bank of the creek and confirming there couldn't be a small girl in the water, search officials started to look beyond the populated area. Nearly 100 forestry officials, deputies, and Sierra Madre search and rescue teams responded and started to methodically search the area. The first 24 hours rescue teams brought bloodhounds into the region and attempted to pick up a scent. They couldn't find any. On Saturday, July 5th, helicopters were flying the area looking for Irene and spotted something on a ridgeline over 2 miles from the campsite. It was the missing girl. She was found much higher in Oliva than where she disappeared and on a ridgeline, an unusual tie-in to be found. Irene was met by ground rescue workers and escorted down the mountain to a search vehicle. She was found to be dehydrated, but alert. She was reunited with her parents and later interviewed by news reporters. On July 7th, the Bakersfield Californian had the following statement from Irene. Irene said she felt just fine except when I saw this bear coming straight at me, a big fat bear. I started yelling and shaking a tree, and he left. I find this statement fascinating for a variety of reasons. Irene said when identifying the bear, and further stated that she was shaking a tree. How could a little 9-year-old girl shake a tree? Maybe a small bush, but a tree? I also think it's interesting that she said it was big and fat, silly, since it was still very early in the summer, and most bears at this time are skinny. The campground that Irene disappeared is 9 miles north from the location where Andrew Thacker's son, Vanna, sped. Both of these kids went missing almost under the eyes of their parents. A shocking reality of the camping stories here. David Holtz, missing 7/13171-9 a.m., Dorst Creek, Sequoia National Park. Age at disappearance, 9 years. Disabled. Sequoia National Park sits just south of Yosemite National Park. Sequoia is not visited as much as Yosemite, yet it has some of the most pristine wilderness and gorgeous views of any national park. The eastern side of the park has miles of huge granite peaks, including Mount Whitney, which at 14,505 feet of elevation is the tallest mountain in the contiguous United States. Dorst Creek is near the Kings Canyon Visitor Center at the far western side of the park and just 3 miles from the giant General Sherman tree. Lieutenant Colonel Edward Holtz was the commanding officer of the Los Angeles Armed Forces Examining and Instruction Center, where he took his 3 sons on a short vacation to Sequoia National Park for camping and fishing. The boys went to the Dorst Creek campground to establish their camp and then began fishing the surrounding area. On July 13th, 1971, Edward was with the boys and returning from fishing in Dorst Creek when 9-year-old David got separated from his brother Mike when he stated he'd take another path. The boys made it back to their campsite with their dad, but David never arrived. A search was quickly made, with the group yelling for Jay, avid and searching the region he was last seen. There was no answer. Newspapers at the time of David's disappearance quoted Edward as stating that his son was mentally retarded, which added an additional difficult element to the search. The National Park Service, local sheriffs, and armed forces personnel from Hamilton Air Force Base were utilized in the search for the boy. The formal search for David lasted 7 days and found nothing. The 8th day of the search was different. A searcher driving to the Dorst Creek campground found a small tackle box on the side of the road. The tackle box was shown to Edward Holtz, and he identified it as being the one that David was carrying the day he disappeared. The fact the tackle box was found on the side of a road that was driven daily during the search and that it was just 1/2 mile from the area he disappeared was both encouraging and a concern for searchers. It seemed almost like someone was sending them some kind of subliminal message. Search parties spent several more days on the mountain looking for David after the toolbox was found. They were a little surprised that the air flights made over the area had failed to see David's bright red and orange shirt he was wearing when he disappeared. After 2 weeks of formal search procedures, the effort to find David Holtz was terminated. Edward Holtz, however, refused to give up the effort to find his son. On July 31st, 18 days after David vanished, Edward and a friend were searching an area called Colony Meadows at an elevation of 7,900 feet and 200 feet above where David vanished, and they found the boy dead. There was never any notation of the condition of David's body, but the Park Service stated he died of exposure and exhaustion, even though an autopsy had not been completed at that time. Summary. To understand how David got to Colony Meadows from Dorst Creek is the fascinating part of the story. Few are to believe that David's tackle box was found on the road leading to Dorst Creek campground. Then we are to believe that David continued the track further east up the creek and toward the meadow. It would appear that David followed the creek upstream across the road, not following the road the half-mile back to the campground or the short distance to the major highway, as neither was the case. David's path led him to an area below Colony Meadows where there was an extremely steep and rock-faced mountainside, then went vertical for 700 to 900 feet, depending where the path was taken. The meadow is a very lush and green area. That is exactly what the name implies, a meadow with large, giant sequoias. I made an FOIA request from the Park Service on April 4th, 2011, and was advised that the case file had been destroyed. Yes, destroyed. In a technology era where millions of paper documents can be kept for hundreds of years on minimal space, these reports are destroyed. David Holtz was a boy with disabilities who disappeared by taking a path a short distance apart from other family members. No trace of the boy was discovered for 8 days until his tackle box was found on a road. It wasn't for another 11 days that David's body was found 1,200 higher in elevation than where he vanished. David's fishing pole was never found, and the specifics about the search for the boy and the condition of his body will never be known because the report was destroyed.